Hello everybody, it's benlowrey here, and in this video I'm going to talk about the difference between public rights and private rights, okay? Because there's a lot of people who've got a misunderstanding about this. Now, public legislation such as a constitution or acts or statutes, anything like that, really does not give you your rights. It gives rights to citizens and members of the society and persons, okay? Your rights are private and inalienable. Now let's draw a blobby circle, and let's say that this line, or everything inside this line, is the government and the legislation, and that line is the limits of government authority. That represents the limits of the job description of what they're allowed to do. You could say that's the Constitution. It limits government authority. It doesn't give you your rights, okay? So let's label this thing. Let's say this is the public, or call it the government, also known as the democracy. Oh yes. And that's where legislation, acts, statutes, also known as positive law, that's where all that stuff exists, okay? Now, we really exist in the private. The common law is the private. So let's say, here's the private, common law, also known as the republic, and that's where your inalienable rights, republic, inalienable, have I spelled that right? Yeah, okay. So this is where we exist. Now, so the public legislation, including the Constitution, acts, statutes, do not give us our rights. We've already got our rights. They're private, inalienable, they're natural, they're everybody's got them, you know, you could say given to us by God, and no legislation, no government can enact anything which trespasses upon our private, inalienable rights, okay? The government can only legislate things that govern its own internal affairs. Now here's where it gets tricky, because in the private, at the common law, in the republic, we are known very specifically as we the people, or you could say you are one of the people. You could say you're one of the people of the republic, or something like that, one of the people at common law, something like that, and referred to as men and women, okay? That's what we really are, okay? But in the public, they use tricky words. Their legislation applies to persons and citizens and taxpayers. And also, I think they use the word individual. Individual. Those are all legal words, and those things are members of the society. So in the public, all the legislation gives rights and protections and benefits to persons and citizens and members of the United States of America, and, you know, the good taxpayers, and, you know, things like that. It's very deceptive because those words sound like they are us. And by the way, that's also the straw man as well. You've obviously heard of that. Okay, so that's your straw man. Now, here's the thing. If, for example, you know, you're getting arrested, they will presume you're a person or a citizen, taxpayer, individual, straw man, all the same thing, and they will ask you that. They'll say you're a U.S. citizen, or in the UK they'll say you're a British citizen or a UK citizen, because they need to establish that you are a member of the society. They need to establish that the acts and the statutes and the legislation apply to you, and they will say things like, you've got the right to remain silent, you've got the right to a lawyer, you've got the right to this. But those rights that they're talking about are not your true private inalienable rights. They are not really rights at all. They're actually benefits, protections, privileges. I might have spelt some of that wrong, okay? So we the people in the private are the employers. We employ, we constitute the government, and we employ them, and all the legislation and the constitution are all the rules. It's the job description which they must abide by, and they cannot exceed the limits of the authority which we gave them. Now, if a policeman is coming, you know, along to me and hassling me, and you know, and presuming I'm a person, presuming I'm a citizen, despite my objections or anything, and what they're doing, from my perspective, is they are exceeding, because they don't have the right to do that to one of the people of the republic. Okay. Not necessarily, anyway. They are exceeding, from my perspective, the limits of the authority which I granted to them. They're breaching their job description, and they are therefore trespassing upon my private inalienable rights, which I will, and I do intend to, sue them for. Okay? Now, here's where it's tricky, because a lot of people that don't know this, a lot of people in the freedom movement and the truth movement, if someone's trying to arrest them, you say things like, I've got rights, I'm a taxpayer, this is atrocious, you can't do this to me, I'm a citizen, I'm a good citizen, there's no... And what you're doing, you're just digging yourself a hole, you're just hanging yourself, because you're basically agreeing that you're under that legislation, and you are hanging yourself, you're giving them authority, you're contracting and letting them basically do what they want with you, okay? Now, sometimes I read legislation. For example, recently I've been reading the PACE manual, which is the police manual, which sets out all the rules and guidelines about how they're allowed to arrest someone, and it gives them all their rules for whether they're allowed to search you or not, and they'll refer to it. If they're trying to arrest you, they'll refer to the PACE manual. They'll say, under Code A, Section 2, you've got the right to remain silent, and we've got the right to search you, and you have to give us a name, or, stuff like that. They'll refer to it, the PACE manual. Now, don't make the mistake of going along with it and agreeing and demanding rights. Don't ever refer to legislation and say, I've got the right to do that. Don't ever say, I'm a citizen, I'm a taxpayer, this is a waste of taxpayer money. It's not helping you. You're just contracting, okay? So I read legislation, but not because I want to learn what my rights and protections are, because I've got them. They're inalienable. They exist in the private. But I read the legislation just because I want to learn what the job description of the police is. And so, just so that I'm familiar with it, that if they breach the limits of the power which was given to them by us, then I'm familiar with what the limits of their authority are. And if they breach those limits, or if they try and imply that I'm a person subject to legislation, in either case, they're breaching the limits of their authority, they're trespassing upon their private and alienable rights, especially if they arrest me or something, and then I will intend to sue them, okay? That's what I'm working on learning at the moment, okay? So the reason I'm saying this is, don't fall into the trap of thinking that you get your rights from the Constitution or any legislation. Don't fall into the trap of when they ask you if you're a citizen, just don't fall into the trap, and don't tell them that you've got rights under this act or that. I don't even care about the human, whatever it's called, the European Declaration of Human Rights. I don't care about that. That don't give you your rights. Again, even that legislation sets out the limits and the boundaries of the authority which the European governments have got. It's the rules and the limits which they must not violate with regards to human rights. That's the limits of their authority. It doesn't give you your human rights. You've already got them. It's the other way round. It limits their authority. It says what they can't do. We are the employers, they are the employees. And so, a person, a citizen, taxpayer, individual, straw man, the legislation to provide to those things, because those entities are just sub-accounts within the public. They're public employees. Your citizen, your straw man is a public employee, subject to all the legislation of the public, and that's it. So, don't demand rights. Don't accept rights which are really benefits, protections, and privileges if someone's trying to arrest you. Okay, if they're doing that. And the PACE manual and the legislation, it says a person may be searched if, it refers to persons. It only applies to public employees, okay? It doesn't apply to we the people, okay? So, there you go. The way to look at it is, where have they exceeded the limits of the authority which we granted to them? Where have they breached their job description? What do their own rules say is the limits of their authority? And if they do that, it's a trespass on our private inalienable rights, and they deserve to be sued for damages. Okay, so I just wanted to shed some light on that, so that people don't hang themselves. Well, you know what I mean. So people don't make it worse for themselves if they're trying to be arrested. The reason this came to mind is, certain famous individuals arrested recently, and I've heard him say things like, "I'm a taxpayer. This is a waste of taxpayer money." Stuff like that, stuff along that lines, and it's just it's working against you if you say things like that. Okay. All right then. Cheers.